Welcome! We're back with makeup and music. I'm so excited. Bob Marley is one of my favorites. I just love him as a person, and also his music is amazing. But yeah, if you guys have any suggestions, go ahead and put them down in the comments. I would love to hear who you would like me to dive a little deeper into next time. Trigger warnings, I will put them on the screen if there's any. Yeah, make sure you hit the like button if you're enjoying it. Hit the subscribe button. I would love to have you here as a part of our little family. And yeah, without further ado, here is Bob Marley. As always, these are done out of a great love for these musicians and these artists. So absolutely no disrespect meant. This is just information I've gathered off the internet and various documentaries and stories, and I've compiled it into a video. And Bob was born Robert Nesta Marley on February 6th, got a birthday coming up, 1945, making him an Aquarius. And he was born in 9 Mile, St. Parish, Jamaica, to parents Norval and Sedalia Malcolm. Now, Norval was a white man from the UK, and Sedalia was 18 years old. And at the time, Norval was quite a bit older. When Bob was 10, his father actually died of a heart attack at age 70. So he was 60 when he had Bob. And I'm just kind of putting all that math together. He was a lot older than his mom. Whatever. We don't judge, as long as people are of age. So Sedalia said Bob was a little country boy, and he liked to ride the donkey and go out in the fields with his grandpa. And 9 Mile was very, very rural. There was no electric, no running water. So Bob was as country as it gets. Now, Sedalia and her children didn't see Norval that much. He was always working, he was always away, but she did say he was good to her. Now, Bob, of course, got rejected a lot because he was a biracial child. And working out in the country in the fields, he said the older kids would always leave like the worst jobs for him. When asked about his race, Bob said, "I don't choose the white side, I don't choose the black side, I choose God's side." Bob's mom remarried Edward Booker, a civil servant from the US, giving him 2 brothers, Richard and Anthony. Now, Bob had a childhood friend named Bunny Wailer. His real name was Neville. And they played music together at primary school and junior school. They even made their own instruments. They would make banjos and drums and little guitars. And at 12, the family left 9 Mile for Trenchtown. And his mom actually had a daughter named Claudette with Bunny's dad. So he and Bunny shared a sister. They all lived in the same house, and now that they were living together, they could really focus on making music. They kind of became students of the new ska music and the latest R&B from the United States. And Bob saw music as kind of an escape, like his way out of Trenchtown. And as much as he wanted to get out of Trenchtown, he said he did love it there. It was home, and I think a lot of us have fond memories of places that will always be home. But he said there was a place in the center of town where the slaves used to be sold, and he said there was just this really heavy vibration there. He said it was a very profound place, as you can imagine. So one day, Sedalia said Bob went to school and he came home and just threw his stuff down, and he says, "I'm not going back to school." And all his attention went into his music. Bob formed several groups as a teen, musical groups as a teen, and they performed under several different names. The Wailing Rude Boys, the Teenagers, the Wailing Wailers, and finally they just became the Wailers. So Bob was working a job as a welder when he was 16. Can you imagine? My kids could barely tie their shoes at 16, much less be a welder. Anyway, he worked with Desmond Decker, who had gotten signed by the famous Jimmy Cliff, and he recorded a song called Judge Not. And even at 16, Jimmy said he was an incredible poet. But Bob's solo endeavor did not sell very well. In 1962, Jamaica gained their independence, and a new sound was birthed out of this freedom, which we know now as reggae. That same year, Bob recorded 4 songs at Federal Studios, and the song One Cup of Coffee was released under the pseudonym Bobby Martell. And the following year, the boys were discovered by record producer Coxsone Dodd. Their single Simmer Down became a #1 hit in Jamaica, selling 70,000 copies, and that may not seem a lot to us, but in Jamaica, that was a ton. And this whole time, they had been paying their dues. They were singing at restaurants and clubs and the town squares, just anywhere they could. They literally ate, slept, and breathed music. They were even living at the studio at one point. Now, Bob would walk the neighborhood, and this one girl named Rita would catch his eye, and one day he wrote her a little note and gave it to a friend for him to give to her. Remember those days? She said he was very, very shy, and she said she thinks this was due to him kind of being the outcast because he was biracial. Now, due to him being an outcast, he found acceptance with Mortimer Plano. He was a Rastafarian spiritual leader, and he became like a father to Bob. And as I've said, Bob didn't really have a relationship with his dad, so he was looking for that father figure. And Mortimer was definitely that for him. Now, Bob was raised Catholic, so Rastafarianism really, it rang true to him. It was based on many of the same principles. And Bob really began to take his faith seriously. This is also when he began growing out his dreadlocks as he took a Nazarite vow. And for those that don't know, a Nazarite vow, you vow to do certain things and not do certain things, and one of them is cut your hair. So he could not cut it or comb it for a certain length of time. So Rita said Bob had found what he had been searching for, which was identity and relationship. And Bob found a lot of comfort in knowing that, even though he didn't know his earthly father, that he knew and was known by his heavenly father and, the one that created him. And his whole journey being Rastafari could be a whole nother thing in itself. So I'm just going to move on from this or I'll never finish. So while they were playing music and recording music, they were not being paid very well. I mean, we're talking like $3 a week. It was absolutely nothing. And they were some of the most famous people in Jamaica. So in '66, Bob married Rita, and he moved the day after he married her to his mother's house in Delaware in the U.S. He needed to make some money. So actually, for a short time, he worked at the DuPont plant in Delaware and the Chrysler plant in Newark under the alias Donald Marley. Rita stayed back in Jamaica until Bob could make some money. And even though he had a regular job, he never gave up on the music. It was said that he spent all his time either at work or in the basement playing music. So once he had made some money, Bob finally returned to Jamaica, and he and the old gang started a new label. They released the song Bend It Low, and it became a huge hit. It was totally self-promoted, and it's still today hard, but a little bit easier to be an indie label. But they had the added hardship of being Rasta because people didn't want a lot to do with Rasta. They kind of just thought they were drug addicts as opposed to seeing their partaking of the devil's lettuce as sacrament. So there was a lot of misunderstanding. So they decided to start working with this new producer. His name was Lee Perry, or Scratch as they called him. I think I just screwed this up. Anyway, Scratch was a very innovative producer, and he and Bob really, and the guys, had a deep spiritual connection because he was also Rasta. And they didn't want to just make music for people to drink and dance to. They wanted it to have a deeper meaning. Bob actually saw his music as a way of spreading the gospel. And when you listen to music it's obvious that that's what he was trying to do. Bob and the Wailers got a gig in London in '72, and Chris Blackwell of Island Records was there. Somebody had asked him if he wanted to go see them, and he had been hearing a little bit of buzz about them. And he said he was really impressed with their music, but he said they just had this charisma and was just really impressed with them as people too, not just as musicians. So he asked them how much it would cost for them to record like a full album. They told them, and he gave them the money to make a new album. Now Chris saw them as like a black rock act. Think Jimi Hendrix and The Experience. And he said he got the sense that Bob was down to explore that, but the other guys were really hesitant. Bob's mindset was like, well, we have to start somewhere, and he wanted to reach the world, not just Jamaica, which they had already done. So the Wailers released their first real album, which was Catch a Fire, and this one is definitely the most, if you listen to it, the most commercial. So they set out on a tour of England for Catch a Fire, but no one really told them it was a promotional tour, so there was a lot of bad food, sleeping in crappy locations, lots of time on the bus. Right before the American leg of the tour, Peter and Bunny dropped out. And if you've never seen interviews with him, you have to see some interviews with Bunny. He's a trip. I take that back. Peter did go on part of the tour, the American leg, but dropped out partway. He felt like he wasn't valued and he wasn't respected as much, so he wound up leaving as well. In the meantime, Bob had 3 children with Rita, and hearing from Ziggy, he said he was kind of a rough father, like not in a bad way. He just wasn't real lovey-dovey, and he was very competitive with them. Like if they would play soccer, he did not hold back, but he did instill the importance of family. And being that they were Rasta, again, they were looked down upon. So all the kids had a hard time keeping friends because the parents of the kids did not like Bob and Rita. So really the kids had each other, and that was it. In 1974, Bob put together a new Wailers lineup, and it included 3 women. The I3, Rita was one of them, she sang, and it was like magic. They were selling sold-out shows, just becoming huge. On July 18th, 1975, this was really a tipping point for them, and from that point on, everyone would kind of know who Bob Marley was. So Chris from Island Records rented a house in Trenchtown. It was at 56 Hope Road, and Bob would actually wind up buying this from Chris. It was originally bought as like a rehearsal space, but it almost became like this commune. Everyone was always there, all these musicians and all these artists and all these spiritual leaders. Now, Rita and the kids did not live there because it attracted some unsavory people. And the problem was that Bob's like 3 doors down from the governor, 2 doors down from the prime minister, and all these Rasta are hanging out at his house. He jokingly said he brought the ghetto uptown. And it's said that there were actually rules at the house on Hope Road. You had to kind of abide by the guidelines, the Rasta guidelines. There were certain things they didn't allow. Now, Bob did not follow the Western idea of one woman, but friends say he was not the womanizer that the media made him out to be. And nothing was a secret. Rita knew everything that was going on. And despite all that, Rita and Bob they just had this understanding. They were soulmates, and they understood each other on a really deep level. And like Rita said that she would actually come in and, get the girls on their way and get Bob up where he needed to be. It was very interesting. So in all, Bob had 11 children from seven different women. I think he took the Bible very literal about being fruitful and multiplying. So in 1976, politics in Jamaica was tense. The left versus the right. Woo. And anyway, Kingston was split down sectarian lines, and it was very, very scary. I mean, people were killing each other on the streets, bombings, it was crazy. And Bob had friends on both sides. He was, kind of right down the middle. He just kind of wanted everyone to get along. But these friends Bob had were sometimes on Jamaica's most wanted. A lot of them were seen as criminals. And with everything going on, Stevie Wonder came and performed in Jamaica, and Bob got to perform with them. And when this happened, Stevie actually donated all the proceeds to the Salvation Army in Jamaica, and Bob was really moved by this. He said, let's do a free show and donate the proceeds, and it was called Smile Jamaica. So the Prime Minister heard about this and decided to get involved, and Bob would actually become inadvertently used for an election campaign. As I said, Bob did not have a side, but they really did use him. And they took advantage of the timing and made it seem like Bob was choosing a side. Bob kind of felt like, I feel they're all crooked. And he was just trying to do a good thing and help his community. And now the optics were that he had chosen this side. So as the concert approaches, they're all rehearsing at the Hope House. And this night they had taken a break, and Rita was out by the car, and Bob and a couple of the guys were inside. They were standing in the kitchen when they saw just a hand. The house was kind of elevated, so you had to walk upstairs to open the front door. And all they saw was a hand with a black glove and a gun. And the guy just opened fire, and they had nowhere to run. They were just kind of ducking and trying to get out of the way. Then the gunman turned the gun towards the car where Rita was at and just kept shooting. And he said they said he kept shooting until there was no more ammunition. And someone yelled, "Is everyone dead?" And the guy said, "Yeah," and they left. So Bob had been grazed. It went across his chest, but it lodged in his arm. Rita had been shot, and Don Taylor as well. It's actually a miracle that no one died that night. And despite the fears that he might be assassinated, he decided to go on with the concert. And people kept asking him, "Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to do it?" And he did, and they all agreed they would do it with him. So that night he got there, and police escorted him on stage, and he played for 80,000 people. It was actually a very, very moving concert. But after the show, Bob kind of was tired of looking over his shoulder all the time. The fear was still there, so he decided to move to London. And he did so in 1977. He moved to Chelsea in another full house with musicians. And at this point, Bob had a whole new respect for his mortality. Now, they were supposed to go on tour in America again, but those plans had to be put on hold because he was having trouble with his foot. Bob was an avid soccer player. He probably could have played professionally. One of his friends had stepped on his toe with a cleat, and he basically just thought that's what it was. But it kept getting worse and kept getting worse, and finally he was diagnosed with melanoma. He had skin cancer on his toe. Now, some reports say they recommended that his leg be amputated at the hip, but I don't think that was true. More realistically, it was probably they wanted to amputate his toe. But because he was such an avid soccer player, it was a huge part of his life and dancing, and he was so afraid that if they amputated it, he wouldn't be able to do those things anymore. So Rita said he got some really, really bad advice from this doctor in Miami who said, "No, you just need to have the nail bed removed." So they did that, and once he recovered from that, he was, back to work again. So in 1978, Jamaica was, again, just in turmoil. And there was a push to have Bob come back home. People were kind of hoping that he could bring some healing, and they were going to have this meeting of the two parties, and they invited Bob to attend it. So a truce was arranged, and a peace conference and concert was set up. And although the fear was still there, Bob agreed to do it. He said, "My life is only important if I'm making others' lives better." So he agreed to headline. So they had this concert, and people from both sides sat together and just came together, even if it was just for the moment. So he actually managed to get leaders from both sides on stage and come together, and he really tried to make a difference. So things got a little better, and they're back in the house on Hope Road, and it became a hub again. And they said people would actually line up asking Bob for like money for food or their children's school fees, and Bob would give it to him. He was very, very generous and giving. And it said he wouldn't just give them, a little. He gave them whatever they needed. In the meantime, Bob continued to tour all over the world, but it actually bothered him that he wasn't reaching a wider Black audience. He said white people were always supportive, but he wanted to reach Black people as well. So he began to tour Africa, and he actually began to date the daughter of the president of Gabon. And someone had told the president he should not host Bob because Rasta, and they were kind of seen as revolutionaries. So they were pot stirrers, if you know what I mean. So, but the president's son really liked Bob, so he hosted him. And the president was kind of a dictator, so the last thing you want in your home is revolutionaries. So the African youth loved Bob, loved what he stood for, what he sang about. And Bob began to write songs about all the conflicts in Africa as well, specifically about what was going on in Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. And he actually used his own money to host a concert when Zimbabwe gained their independence. Next, Bob set his sights on the Black youth of America. And he said they seem to be the only holdouts. I'm gonna put on some lashes and I'll be right back. Okay, lashes on, trying a new glue, so if they look wonky, I apologize. So Bob played at a show at Madison Square Garden, and Rita said this was definitely another tipping point for his career, in the US anyway. But sadly, the next day, Bob was exercising. He was running in Central Park, and he fell and had a seizure. So of course, they took him to the doctor in New York, and unfortunately they found out Bob's melanoma had spread and metastasized, and at this point there was absolutely no treatment of it optional for him. It had just spread everywhere. So the next stop was Pittsburgh, and the band was waiting for Bob to come on the bus, and they said he was acting very strange. So they had a meeting before the show, and Bob informed them of what was going on. And this would actually be Bob's last concert. The crowd asked for an encore, and he did 4 songs, and then another encore, and that was it. His performing career was over. They went ahead and did what they could do, and Bob was treated at Sloan Kettering in New York, which is actually where my mother-in-law was treated for her cancer. Due to the chemo, Bob's locks began to fall out, so Rita lit some candles, and they read from the book of Job while they cut his locks off, what was left of his locks off. And because of the vow he took, this was incredibly devastating for Bob. His locks defined him. It wasn't just a look or a hairstyle. It represented what he lived for, which was his faith and his vow to God. This was also the first time his children had ever seen him without his locks. In late October, Bob was discharged, with them telling him there was nothing else that they could do, and Bob was only given 3 weeks to live. However, Bob had heard about this doctor in Germany, Joseph Easels, and so he was sent there to a holistic clinic. It was actually located in Bavaria, and my mom went there and said it's the most beautiful place she's ever seen. This would actually become Bob's home from November of 1980 until April of 1981. Bob's nurse said he loved the winter. Probably don't get a lot of that in Jamaica. And she said he was just so kind and caring and compassionate and really patient with his treatments. I'm not saying a lot because if you've ever had cancer or taken care of someone with cancer, you know that it can be very painful at times and it's hard to get through. Now, in February, everyone came to Germany to celebrate Bob's 36th birthday. He had had a stroke on his left side, so he could no longer play guitar, and he was really frustrated about that, but Bob never gave up hope, and he kept fighting. Way longer than the 3 weeks that the doctor in New York had given him. And I think that speaks to the strength he had, that he managed to squeeze out 5 more months of his life. Bob never even wrote a will. He was that determined to make it. But that, as the love of money is the root of all evil, would cause some issues later. But his friend said maybe Bob knew that and deliberately left out a will, because by leaving it open like that, Bob knew that it would reveal people. It would reveal their true intentions and who they really were. So finally, that doctor exhausted all his treatments that he had and all ideas for Bob. And he finally told Rita he can go home, but it needs to be within the next 48 hours. So they rented a plane and he flew to Miami on May 8th. 1981. And Rita brought all the kids from Jamaica, not just her kids, all of his kids. And they all got to spend a little time with their dad. He left them with some pearls of wisdom. And he finally passed 3 days later on May 11th, 1981. He was only 36 years old. And his last words were rumored to be to his son Ziggy. And he said, "Money can't buy a life." Bob was flown home to Jamaica, and actually a state service was held for him. This was on May 21st, 1981, and he was buried near his birthplace with his guitar. In 1994, Bob was finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Rolling Stone placed him number 11 as the 100 greatest artists of all time. It's always sad when you lose somebody so young and who still had so much to offer to the world, especially somebody who was such a good person. I really enjoyed learning more about him, about Jamaica. Yeah, this was kind of a bittersweet one, which a lot of them are. But I always like to leave with a quote, and it's very famous, but it's great advice. Bob said, "Love the life you live the life you love." Alright, y'all. Well, if you enjoyed this makeup and music, I hope you will hit the like button. It helps me out. I hope you will subscribe, as we will do these again. Also for more makeup content. Yeah, if you guys would share, this helps me out a lot too. I'm about halfway to monetization, so I'm working my way up there. I will leave a link to a documentary in the description box below, as well as some other affiliate links if you'd like to help me out. But yeah, that's going to be all for today. I hope you'll come back again. Hit the notification bell so you're notified when my next video goes up. And I love you so much. Bye.